It happened so suddenly that even now, I sometimes wonder if I imagined it. One moment I was smiling, believing I was being included in something special, and the next, I was staring at the coldest truth of my life. My own son and his wife had turned their backs on me, no hesitation, no second thoughts, just the quiet, deliberate decision to leave me behind. There are moments in life when betrayal feels like a physical wound. I remember the sting in my chest, the hollow in my stomach, the way the world seemed to tilt sideways. I kept asking myself, did I hear that right? Did they really just do that to me? But there was no misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I had always believed that family was the one thing you could depend on, that blood was stronger than anything else. But in that instant, I realized how naive that belief had been. Their faces were calm, almost practiced, as if they had rehearsed this moment. And what made it even crueler was the fact that they didn't look back. They didn't even flinch. To them, I wasn't their mother anymore, or even a person to protect. I was an obstacle, an inconvenience. The sting of it cut deeper because of what was at stake. They weren't just abandoning me out of anger or resentment, they were doing it because of money. Wealth I had spent my life building. Wealth that was meant to provide security for generations had twisted into a weapon pointed back at me. Trust, love, family, those words suddenly felt meaningless. I remember standing there, frozen, unable to breathe for a moment. My heart was pounding, my thoughts scattered. I kept replaying every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had chosen to give instead of keep, every time I had put them first. Was it really all worth nothing to them? Did they see me only as a number on a bank account? A name on a legal document? That day marked the exact moment when my life split into two. Before, when I still believed my son loved me. And after, when I understood that love could be bought, sold, and discarded like something disposable. The irony is, I had seen small signs before moments I brushed aside, excuses I told myself to preserve peace. I thought I was being generous, forgiving, but standing in that moment, staring at the truth, I realized those signs had been warnings. Warnings I didn't want to hear. And maybe that's where this story truly begins, not just with betrayal, but with blindness. Because sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones others inflict, but the ones we allow by refusing to see the truth. Looking back now, I can trace every thread that led to that moment. It started years earlier, with choices I made out of love, sacrifices I thought would bind us together. If only I had known what those sacrifices would cost me. When I look back on it now, I can see how much I wanted to believe in the picture of family I carried in my heart. For years, I told myself that the sacrifices I made were worth it, that every long night, every dollar saved, every compromise meant a stronger bond with my son. And in the beginning, it almost felt true. There were moments of warmth I held on to tightly. Holidays where we laughed around the table. Birthdays when I baked his favorite cake. Afternoons when I picked up the pieces of his dreams and quietly stitched them back together. I gave without keeping score, because that's what love does. Love doesn't count. Love just gives. When he married, I welcomed his wife as though she were my own daughter. I tried to smooth every rough edge between us, convincing myself that her sharp remarks were just nerves, or that her distance was simply her way of adjusting. I told myself, not everyone shows affection the same way. I wanted her to feel like part of the family, so I gave her space, respect, and more often than not, forgiveness. But little by little, I began to notice how the warmth changed. A smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, a tone that sounded sweet but left a sting, invitations that felt more like obligations than genuine gestures. I kept brushing those feelings aside, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, wasn't this what parents were supposed to do? Support their children unconditionally, even if it meant swallowing discomfort. Still, the small things began to add up. I noticed how they rolled their eyes when I told old stories, how my gifts, chosen with care, were set aside without a second glance, how my voice seemed to fade in rooms where their ambitions took center stage. Slowly, I went from being someone they leaned on to someone they tolerated. The hardest part was how I clung to the illusion. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that they were busy, that they still loved me. I thought if I just gave a little more, they would meet me halfway. But deep down, I was beginning to feel the cracks. And sometimes, when the house grew too quiet, I wondered if the bond I had believed in was already gone. That unease was only the beginning, though I didn't yet realize how far they were willing to go, or how close I was to losing everything, including my life. The moment I realized it wasn't an accident was the moment my world collapsed. There was no hesitation in their actions, no sign of panic that might suggest a mistake. It was deliberate. They had planned for this. My own flesh and blood had decided my life was expendable. I remember the chill that hit me first, not just the cold air around me, but the icy truth settling in my chest. 1 second, I was surrounded by what I thought was family. The next, I was abandoned, left alone, swallowed by silence. The sound of their footsteps fading away was like a final verdict. Panic hit me in waves. My body trembled as I struggled to comprehend the cruelty. My heart pounded, and every breath felt like it might be my last. The fear wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a shattering realization that I was disposable to the people I had once trusted most. I tried to fight, to hold on, but despair wrapped around me like heavy chains. For a terrifying moment, I gave in. I thought this was it, that my story would end here, erased quietly by the very hands I had once held in love. I could feel my body weakening, and my mind spun between disbelief and anger. Anger that my sacrifices meant nothing. Anger that love had been repaid with betrayal. And then, in the midst of that darkness, a different sound reached me. A voice. A stranger's hands pulling me from the edge where my family had left me. The shock of contact rough, hurried, but gentle enough to remind me that not everyone had turned against me. I remember the strength in those arms, the way I was lifted, carried, wrapped in something warm. My rescuer didn't ask for anything. He didn't hesitate. He simply acted, a stranger stepping in where my family had failed. That moment burned itself into me. The contrast was staggering, the cruelty of those bound to me by blood, and the kindness of someone who owed me nothing. It was in that contrast that I found a spark of hope. As I lay recovering, the fear slowly gave way to a new fire inside me. I realized I couldn't let this end with betrayal. I needed to know why they had done it, how long they had planned it, and what they stood to gain. More importantly, I needed to survive not just to live, but to uncover the truth and make sure their cruelty didn't win. That day, I stopped being the victim they wanted me to be. I became a survivor. And survivors don't just endure, they fight back. Recovery gave me time to think. And time is a dangerous gift when you've been betrayed. My body was still weak, but my mind refused to rest. I couldn't stop replaying their faces, the calm way they walked away, the quiet confidence that I wouldn't survive. It wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. That realization haunted me. If it was strategy, it meant there was more to the story than I understood. I began piecing things together, starting with the papers they had pushed in front of me weeks before. At the time, I had brushed it off as confusing legal jargon, trusting that they were only helping me. Now, in hindsight, I could see the sharp edges. Documents that looked like medical reports claiming I was forgetful. Legal forms hinting at guardianship. Bank transfers I never authorized. The deeper I thought, the more I realized I had been groomed into helplessness. When I managed to gain access to fragments of my financial records, the truth hit harder than the betrayal itself. My accounts had been quietly drained. Assets shifted into trusts I didn't remember signing. My name was being erased piece by piece, replaced with theirs. And at the heart of it all was a web too intricate for two people to spin alone. That's when I saw the first clue of something larger. In the paperwork, buried between amendments to my will, was a name I didn't recognize. A guardian clause mentioning a future child. My heart stopped. A child. My son and his wife had no children, or so I thought. Yet there it was in black and white provisions for any future heirs, as if the baby already existed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I dug deeper, and the pattern became clearer. Medical expenses billed to a private clinic. Payments routed through shell accounts. And then, the detail that shook me to my core, a forged birth certificate. A baby listed under their names, supposedly born just weeks before. But I knew it was impossible. I had seen her only days earlier. Her body giving no sign of pregnancy or recovery. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't only about cutting me out, it was about replacing me entirely. My son and his wife hadn't just plotted to steal what I built. They had orchestrated the arrival of a child who would inherit everything once I was gone. A child that, by all appearances, wasn't truly theirs. Fear gripped me, but alongside it came something stronger: determination. If they could fabricate children and rewrite history with forged documents, then my survival wasn't just inconvenient to them, it was dangerous. They needed me gone for good. So I made a decision. As far as they and the rest of the world were concerned, I was already dead. And if that illusion gave me time to understand the scope of this conspiracy, I would embrace it. Because now I knew the truth, I wasn't fighting just my family's greed. I was standing against something far bigger and far darker than I had ever imagined. And I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered every piece of it. I never imagined I would live long enough to see my own funeral. Yet there I was, hidden at a distance, watching as people gathered to mourn me. The air was heavy with flowers and hushed voices, and for a fleeting second, I wanted to believe it was real, that the tears shed were genuine, that the grief carried weight. But then I saw their faces. My son and his wife, standing at the center like grieving saints. accepting condolences with a grace they had rehearsed. The performance was flawless. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. He shook hands solemnly, speaking in hushed tones about my so-called declining health. They wore black, their posture heavy with sorrow, and the crowd believed every second of it. Friends of mine embraced them, whispering how brave they were. Neighbors shed tears, convinced they were comforting a family struck by tragedy. I stood just beyond the tree line, my heart pounding, not from sadness, but from disbelief. The lies flowed so smoothly, it was as if they had been preparing for this scene for months. Every detail had been arranged, the framed photographs, the speeches about my memory lapses, the carefully planted story of a woman who had lost herself long before she was gone. That was the moment I saw the truth with piercing clarity. This wasn't just greed, it was theater. They weren't just stealing my life, they were rewriting it. They had staged my death to erase me completely, to turn me into a fragile shadow who had slipped away quietly while they carried on as victims of fate. For a moment, bitterness nearly consumed me. To watch people I loved embrace them, to hear kind words spoken over a grave that didn't even hold me, it felt like dying a second time. But then, something stronger than grief took hold. As I stood in the shadows, I realized I had an advantage no one else in that crowd could imagine. I was alive, and while they were busy playing their parts, I was free to plan. I left the cemetery quietly, carrying the image of their false tears like fuel. They thought they had buried me. What they didn't know was that I was already sharpening the truth into a weapon. And when the time came, I would return not as the victim they tried to erase, but as the reckoning they never saw coming. The day I chose to return was the day everything changed. I had spent weeks gathering pieces of the puzzle copies of forged documents, financial records, even the false birth certificate they had slipped into my estate papers. Each page I collected was like a shield, proof that I hadn't imagined the betrayal. Proof that I was not only alive, but sharper and stronger than they had ever expected. When I finally walked back into that house, I didn't knock. I wanted the first sound they heard to be my footsteps, firm and undeniable. My son looked up, his face draining of color as if he had seen a ghost. And in a way, he had. His wife froze, lips parted, her body trembling with the weight of a truth she could no longer escape. I felt the silence stretch between us, heavy and suffocating. Then I spoke, not with anger, but with a calm certainty that came from survival. I laid the evidence before them, one piece at a time: the forged signatures, the bank transfers, the fabricated reports of my supposed dementia. Each item cut through their denials like glass. Their carefully constructed world began to collapse in front of them. For a moment, I thought they might try to fight back with words, to weave another layer of lies. But before they could, the sound of a door opening behind me shifted the air. Law enforcement stepped in, officers who had been waiting for my signal. That was twist number 3. I hadn't come alone. I had handed over my evidence to investigators days earlier, and now they were here to finish what I had started. Watching my son's face as the officers read his rights was both devastating and liberating. The boy I had raised, the man I had loved unconditionally, was now being exposed for what he had chosen to become. His wife's mask cracked completely, her tears no longer a performance, but the real, raw fear of consequences closing in. I stood taller than I had in years, not because of revenge, but because dignity had returned to me. I was no longer the helpless figure they had tried to erase. I was the witness, the survivor, the one who had lived to tell the truth. As they were led away, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The lies, the shadows, the fear they no longer had power over me. Justice was in motion, not just for me, but for every person who had ever been silenced by betrayal. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Survival is not just about living through the pain. It is about standing in the truth, no matter how much it hurts, and reclaiming the life someone else tried to steal. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something far stronger, my chance to rebuild, to reflect, and to finally understand what family truly means. In the quiet after the storm, I finally had space to breathe. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder or questioning who I could trust. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined me. Instead, what stood out was the strength I didn't know I had the ability to survive, to fight back, and to reclaim the life that others tried to steal. The hardest part wasn't losing money or reputation. It was losing the illusion of family. For so long, I believed blood alone was enough, that being a parent meant unconditional love would always be returned. But the truth I learned is painful and liberating. At the same time, family isn't about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up, who protects you, and who chooses you when life gets hard. I found more kindness in the hands of strangers than I did in my own flesh and blood. And while that reality still stings, it also reminds me that love can come from unexpected places. We aren't bound by the betrayals of others. We are defined by the choices we make moving forward. So if there's one lesson I carry from this ordeal, it's this: never let someone else's greed or cruelty erase your worth. You are more than the way others treat you. You are stronger than the wounds they leave behind. And you have the right to rebuild your life with people who value you for who you are, not for what you have. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment with your own thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters, and you never know who it might inspire.